Let me ask you something. When was the last time you fixed something? Maybe it was a leaky faucet, a squeaky door, or a loose screw. Feels good, right? To take a broken thing and make it whole again. But here's the thing. Sometimes what's broken is broken for a reason. Some things are meant to stay that way. I learned this the hard way. I've always been handy. Grew up in a garage with a father who believed there wasn't a single thing in this world a wrench couldn't fix. A good tool isn't just metal and bolts, he'd say, tapping his grease-stained knuckles on the workbench. It's a partner. Treat it right, and it'll treat you right. I think about that now, about how proud he'd be of me for landing the maintenance job at the Congress Plaza Hotel in Chicago. The pay was decent, the hours quiet, but I wonder if he'd have the same advice if he knew about the wrench, about what it carried and what it demanded. The Congress Plaza isn't just a hotel, it's a legend. Everyone in Chicago has a story about it. Gangsters running booze in the 1920s, bodies hidden in walls, guests vanishing in the middle of the night. It's the kind of place where history seeps into every crack and corner, where the air feels heavier the moment you step inside. And yet, when I saw the job posting, I didn't hesitate. I needed the work. Bills don't care about legends. On my first day, they handed me a ring of keys and pointed me toward the basement. "Maintenance room's down there," the clerk said, her voice flat, her eyes never quite meeting mine. She didn't tell me about the wrench. She didn't tell me about the rules, and she definitely didn't tell me about the boiler. If you're expecting a ghost story, you're half right. There are ghosts here, sure, plenty of them. But what haunts the Congress Plaza isn't just spirits, it's the building itself, alive in a way that bricks and mortar shouldn't be. It breathes, it remembers, and it has rules. That wrench, it wasn't just left behind, it was waiting for me. If you think this sounds like the beginning of a bad dream, you're not wrong. I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just another job. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The Congress Plaza Hotel looked tired in the fading afternoon light, like an aging monarch still clinging to its throne. Its brick facade was weathered, its windows clouded by grime, but there was a strange dignity about it, like it was daring the city to forget what it had once been. I stood on the sidewalk, staring up at it, the weight of the toolbox in my hand growing heavier with each second. Inside, the lobby was quieter than I'd expected. The high ceilings and chandeliers should have felt grand, but instead, they loomed, casting long shadows on the cracked marble floors. A single bell echoed somewhere in the distance, its chime sharp and unsettling. The desk clerk barely looked up as I approached, her face pale and drawn, her hands trembling slightly as she slid a key across the counter. "Maintenance room's in the basement," she muttered, her voice clipped and hurried. "Anything I should know before I start?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the staircase that led down to the basement. "Just do your job. Don't wander. And if you hear anything strange, keep it to yourself." "Strange how?" I pressed, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned her attention to the phone on the desk, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. The basement smelled of damp concrete and rusted metal, the air thick and stale. The maintenance room was tucked into a corner, its door hanging slightly off its hinges. Inside, the walls were lined with tools, wrenches, hammers, pliers, all neatly arranged on wooden racks. But one tool stood out immediately. The wrench was sitting on the workbench, its metal blackened and scarred as though it had been pulled from a fire. A folded piece of paper rested beside it, its edges singed. I unfolded it carefully, the faint smell of smoke wafting up as I read the words written in blocky, uneven handwriting. "Welcome to the job. The wrench is yours. Keep it close and follow the rules. They're not suggestions." The rules were scrawled below, each one numbered and underlined. Rule 1. The boiler room door must remain locked at all times. Rule 2. If you hear knocking, do not respond. Rule 3. Never let the boiler go cold. Rule 4. If the smoke turns black, leave immediately. Rule 5. Do not touch anything that wasn't here when you arrived. Rule 6. If the wrench feels hot, drop it and run. I stared at the paper, my stomach tightening. Rules for a maintenance job? It felt like a joke, some kind of hazing ritual for new employees. But there was something about the way the words were written, hurried, almost frantic, that made my hands tremble as I set the paper down. A low hum filled the room, steady and deep, vibrating through the floorboards. The boiler. I grabbed the wrench, its weight unfamiliar in my hand, and headed toward the sound. The hallway leading to the boiler room was narrow and poorly lit, the walls streaked with grime. Each step echoed, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The hum was louder now, almost a growl, and I could feel the heat radiating from the metal. My hand hovered over the doorknob, the weight of the wrench grounding me. I thought of the first rule. The boiler room door must remain locked at all times. But it wasn't locked. The knob turned easily under my hand, and the door creaked open to reveal the room beyond. The boiler room was like stepping into another world. The air was thick, almost choking, heavy with the scent of oil and something faintly metallic. The walls were lined with pipes, twisting and snaking around like the veins of some massive ancient creature. The boiler itself stood in the center, a hulking, rust-streaked beast that seemed too large for the room. It hummed faintly, the sound vibrating through the floor and into my chest. I tightened my grip on the wrench as I stepped closer. The heat radiating from the boiler was oppressive, and the closer I got, the harder it was to ignore the stains streaking its surface. Black, tar-like streaks ran down the sides, pooling at the base in sticky puddles. I crouched down, inspecting the stains, and the faint smell of burnt wood and, was that meat? Hit me like a slap. My stomach churned. That's when I noticed something else. Scratches along the edges of the boiler's steel panels. They weren't random marks. They looked deliberate, like someone had taken a knife to the metal and carved letters. Squinting in the dim light, I leaned closer and realized they were words. Don't let it go cold. I straightened up quickly, the wrench slipping slightly in my sweaty palm. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just nerves. Someone must have scratched that in years ago, a warning for whoever worked here before me. Nothing to worry about. I just needed to do my job. I moved to the control panel, my eyes scanning the ancient dials and switches. One of the pressure gauges was flickering, its needle hovering dangerously close to the red zone. The boiler was running too hot. I adjusted one of the valves, listening as the hum shifted slightly, and wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. That's when I heard it. A faint knock. It was soft, almost gentle, like knuckles tapping against a wooden door. I froze, my hand still resting on the valve, and strained to listen. The sound came again, louder this time, echoing in the tight space. It was coming from inside the boiler. I stepped back, the wrench clattering against the floor as I gripped it tighter. My mind raced. It couldn't be real. Boilers didn't make knocking sounds, at least not like that. It sounded human. "Hello?" I called out before I could stop myself. My voice bounced off the walls, sounding small and uncertain. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the low hum of the boiler. Then, the sound came again, sharper and more insistent, like whoever or whatever was inside was growing impatient. My instincts screamed at me to open the hatch, to see what was inside, but the rules flashed in my mind like a neon sign. If you hear knocking, do not respond. I backed away slowly, my chest tightening as the knocking grew louder, more frantic. The wrench in my hand felt hot now, the metal searing against my palm, but I didn't dare drop it. I reached the door, slammed it shut, and locked it, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The knocking stopped instantly. I stumbled back into the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. The wrench was cool again, its surface smooth and unremarkable, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. The boiler room's door loomed behind me as I retreated to the maintenance office, my heart still racing. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, clutching the wrench like a lifeline. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the boiler seeping through the walls. My skin prickled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just woken something up. I slumped into the old chair at the desk, letting out a shaky breath. My eyes fell on the rules card again. The words burned into my brain now. The wrench sat on the desk in front of me, its surface dull and lifeless, no hint of the heat that had seared my hand minutes before. It almost looked harmless. Almost. The air in the room was heavy, oppressive. The fluorescent light flickered above me, casting the room into brief bursts of shadow. I reached for the thermos of coffee I'd brought, anything to distract me from the gnawing unease settling in my gut. But as I raised it to my lips, I heard it. Whispers. At first, I thought it was the pipes, the distant sound of water running through the building's ancient veins. But the whispers grew louder, clearer, forming words I couldn't quite make out. They were soft, almost melodic, but laced with something dark and guttural, like a voice filtered through static. Help! Us! I froze, the thermos hovering inches from my lips. My eyes darted to the door, then to the walls, searching for the source of the sound. The whispers grew more frantic, overlapping and drowning each other out until they became a cacophony. My breath hitched as I realized the sound was coming from the pipes themselves, snaking through the walls and ceiling. I grabbed the wrench instinctively, its weight grounding me. The whispers faded instantly, replaced by a low, rhythmic tapping that sent an unsettling shiver through me. It was deliberate, purposeful, like a signal. The pipes along the far wall began to rattle, shaking violently as if something was crawling through them. My grip on the wrench tightened, my knuckles white. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the room, and then, without warning, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I approached the pipes cautiously, the wrench raised like a weapon. The metal was cold to the touch, but I could feel the vibrations beneath my fingertips, like something alive was coiled inside, waiting. A single word hissed through the air, soft but unmistakable. Run. I barely slept that day, my dreams filled with images of the boiler, the black smoke curling into faces, and the wrench glowing red-hot in my hand. When my next shift started, the air in the hotel felt different, heavier, as though the building itself was holding its breath. I tried to convince myself that the whispers had been my imagination, the product of exhaustion and stress. But as I descended into the basement, my chest tightened. The hallway seemed longer than before, the shadows deeper. I clutched the wrench like a talisman, its cool metal oddly comforting. When I reached the maintenance office, I found the door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I was certain I had locked it before leaving. I pushed it open cautiously, my flashlight sweeping the room. Everything was where I'd left it, except for the wrench. It was no longer on the desk. My pulse quickened as I scanned the room, and then I saw it, propped against the boiler room door, as though it had been placed there deliberately. I approached it slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave the building and never return. But I couldn't. I needed the paycheck, and more than that, I needed answers. I picked up the wrench, its surface warm again. The door to the boiler room creaked open on its own, the sound grating like nails on a chalkboard. The boiler hummed louder than before, a deep, resonant sound that made the walls tremble. Black smoke was leaking from the vents, curling along the floor like living tendrils. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw it. The boiler's metal surface was slick with the same black tar-like substance I'd seen before, but now it seemed to move, rippling like liquid. The tapping started again, louder this time, coming from all around me. And then the smoke began to rise, forming shapes, twisted skeletal figures with hollow eyes that stared right through me. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the threshold, and the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening clang. The wrench burned in my hand, and I dropped it, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing in the oppressive silence. The shadows along the walls seemed to shift, forming letters, words that burned themselves into my brain. You broke the rules. The door to the boiler room had slammed shut with a finality that made my stomach drop. I stumbled back into the maintenance office, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the desk. The wrench sat where I'd dropped it, its blackened surface still warm to the touch. I didn't dare pick it up again. The shadows along the walls still seemed to move, writhing and twisting as though alive. The words, "You broke the rules," flickered in and out of existence, the letters dissolving into the gloom before I could fully process them. My breaths came in shallow gasps, the air around me suffocatingly heavy. I needed answers. Whatever this was, whatever it wasn't just in my head. I pulled open the battered filing cabinet in the corner, rifling through decades worth of papers and records. Maintenance logs, expense reports, memos from managers long gone. They all felt irrelevant, meaningless. But then I found it. A thin, leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked and worn with age. The initials AW were embossed in faded gold lettering on the front. I flipped it open, my hands shaking, and began to read. December 15th, 1933. The Prohibition days are over, and business has returned to normal, or as normal as it gets at the Congress Plaza. But the boiler, there's something wrong with it. The stains won't come off, no matter how much we scrub. The smoke smells worse every day. The other workers say it's just residue from the years we burned, things we shouldn't have. But I swear, I hear voices when I'm down there. Knocking, whispering. I told the manager, but he just laughed and said to keep the damn thing running. If it stops, he says, we're all in trouble. January 3rd, 1934. The knocking is louder now, and last night I saw something. A face pressed against the glass panel of the boiler. It was gone in an instant, but I know what I saw. The others won't talk about it. They avoid the boiler room entirely unless they have to be there. I'm the only one left who still does the rounds, and every time, I feel like I'm being watched. The wrench, it feels heavier every day. Sometimes I think it's alive. The entries became more frantic, the handwriting messier, the words barely legible. The final entry left an unsettling shiver coursing through me. February 2nd, 1934. The boiler stopped last night, completely shut down. The smoke turned black, and the knocking didn't stop this time. They came out. I don't know what they are, but they came out of the boiler. They spoke to me. They said I belong to it now, that I'll never leave. I locked the door, but it won't hold. If anyone finds this, don't stay. Don't try to fix it. Just leave. The notebook slipped from my hands, landing on the desk with a thud. My mind raced as the words burned themselves into my memory. The boiler, the wrench, the smoke. This had been going on for decades, maybe longer. And now it was happening to me. The low hum of the boiler grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards like a heartbeat. I glanced at the wrench, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. It felt like it was watching me, waiting for me to pick it up. The rules flashed in my mind again. Never let the boiler go cold. But I couldn't go back in there. Not after what I'd seen. The humming of the boiler was no longer a distant vibration. It was a thunderous, oppressive rhythm, like a giant heart beating beneath the building, shaking the walls and rattling the pipes. I tried to ignore it, to stay in the safety of the maintenance office, but deep down, I knew it was useless. The notebook's final words echoed in my mind. They came out. A sharp metallic clang pierced through the noise, followed by a low, guttural groan. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating through the basement. Then, the unmistakable hiss of steam escaping from the pipes reached my ears. The room grew colder, the air sharp and biting against my skin. I grabbed the wrench instinctively, its familiar weight grounding me despite the fear that coiled in my chest. When I opened the office door, the hallway outside was bathed in a thin veil of black smoke. It slithered along the walls, curling and writhing like it had a mind of its own. The rancid smell of burnt wood and flesh hit me like a wave, making my stomach churn. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the haze, but as I moved closer to the boiler room, I saw something that made me freeze. The door to the boiler room was wide open. It was impossible. I had locked it. I was sure of it. But now it stood ajar, black smoke pouring out in thick, undulating waves. I stepped closer, the wrench growing warmer in my hand. The edges of the doorframe were charred, the wood splintered and blackened as though it had been burned from the inside. Then I saw them. Shapes moved within the smoke, their outlines barely distinguishable but unmistakably human. They twisted and writhed, their limbs too long and their movements unnatural, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, and as I watched, one of them turned its head toward me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The shape stepped forward, the smoke parting around it, revealing its full form. It was a man. At least it had been. His face was gaunt, his skin charred and cracked like burned wood. His eyes were black pits, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "You broke the rules," he rasped, his voice a guttural whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Now you belong to us." The wrench burned in my hand, the heat searing my skin, but I couldn't let go. The figure moved closer, its skeletal fingers outstretched, and I did the only thing I could think of. I swung the wrench with all my strength. The metal passed through the figure as though it wasn't there, and the smoke swirled around me, engulfing me in its suffocating embrace. The smell of burnt flesh was overwhelming, and my vision blurred as the world spun around me. I stumbled backward, the wrench falling from my hand and clattering to the floor. The smoke pulled back suddenly, retreating into the boiler room as though called by some unseen force. The figures dissolved into the darkness, their hollow eyes lingering in my mind as I gasped for air. I staggered to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. The boiler loomed before me, its surface slick with black tar that dripped onto the floor in slow, deliberate drops. The hum was louder now, almost deafening, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the smoke wasn't escaping. It was feeding. The boiler was alive. The realization hit me like a freight train. The boiler wasn't just a machine. It was a vessel, a trap for the souls of those who had broken the rules. The smoke wasn't smoke. It was them. The remnants of the workers and guests who had been consumed by the hotel's hunger. I turned to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the walls closing in and the air growing colder with every step. The wrench was back in my hand, though I didn't remember picking it up. Its surface glowed faintly, the etched rules shimmering in the dim light. A voice whispered in my ear, low and menacing, "Keep it running." I stopped, my breath hitching as I realized there was no escape. The boiler's hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest, and the shadows along the walls began to twist and shift, forming words. The boiler feeds. The boiler takes. The boiler remembers. The wrench in my hand felt impossibly heavy, as though the entire weight of the Congress Plaza Hotel rested in its cold, burned metal. The hallway twisted around me, warping like a bad dream. The boiler room door, now fully open, glowed faintly in the distance, its sickly light spilling out into the suffocating darkness. The hum of the boiler grew louder with every step, a low, guttural vibration that felt like it was emanating from deep within my chest. As I stepped into the boiler room, the smoke returned, curling around my feet like a living thing. The boiler itself was no longer just a machine. It had transformed. The rusted metal now seemed organic, pulsating as though it had veins and a heartbeat. The black tar-like substance dripped faster, pooling around its base and reflecting the dim, flickering light. And then, as though the boiler itself had willed it, the smoke parted. The walls shimmered, and images began to appear, like projections from a film reel burned into the very fabric of the room. They played out in flickering, disjointed scenes, each one more horrifying than the last. I saw men in sharp suits standing in the boiler room, their faces obscured by shadows. Their hands were red, not with paint or grease, but with blood. They laughed as they dumped bodies into the boiler, the flames roaring higher with every addition. The smoke turned black, and the faces in the smoke screamed silently, their mouths open in eternal agony. The scene shifted. Now there were workers, maintenance men like me, shoveling coal into the roaring flames, their eyes hollow, their movements mechanical. One of them paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, his face gaunt and pale. He glanced over his shoulder as though sensing someone watching, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. It was the man from the journal. I staggered back, the wrench slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The images shifted again, and this time, they were clearer, more recent. I saw a man in a crisp uniform walking into the boiler room, his movements slow and deliberate. He was holding something in his hand, a wrench identical to mine. The man turned, and my blood ran cold. It was me. The boiler roared, and the smoke rose higher, the faces within it screaming in unison. The room shook violently, the walls cracking as the images faded, replaced by words burned into the metal of the boiler itself. The boiler feeds. The boiler takes. The boiler remembers. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head as the voices grew louder, overlapping into an unbearable roar. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. When I woke up, I was back in the maintenance office. The wrench was on the desk, its surface cool and unmarked. The rules card was gone, and the room felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. I stood on shaky legs, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened. But when I stepped into the hallway, I realized I wasn't in the Congress Plaza Hotel anymore. The walls were different, the air heavier. A single door stood at the end of the hall, its surface blackened and charred. The faint hum of a boiler echoed behind it. I approached cautiously, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. As I opened it, the boiler roared to life, and the wrench appeared in my hand, its surface glowing faintly. The voices returned, softer this time, whispering in unison, "Welcome back, Keeper." And that's when I understood. The boiler didn't just take, it trapped. And now, I was part of it. Bound to the building, to the rules, to the endless cycle. If you ever find yourself in the Congress Plaza Hotel, stay away from the basement. And if you see a wrench lying on a workbench, do yourself a favor. Leave it there. Because once you pick it up, it's already too late.